leave the EU. So James, if you're out there, here he comes. Please join us on stage. Thank you very much, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me along this evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I invariably start my speeches at these particular events by saying that I am not a politician, albeit that I've spent 45 years of my life being advised to become one. So, as King Henry VIII said to most of his wives, I won't keep you long. We are to be preached the gospel of lonely isolation. If we leave the European Union, we're told that we're going to be all alone. Nobody's going to speak to us. There'll be mass exodus of corporate giants from our shores. 3 million people will lose their jobs, and our national security will be in peril. And the Germans and the French will have every justification in taking possession of the sunbeds on the beach. But ladies and gentlemen, you know, we've been down this road before. During the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon Bonaparte imposed what was called the Continental Blockade. As of November the 1st, 1806, all European countries were banned from trading with Great Britain. Spain and Russia defied the ban, and Napoleon invaded both of them. It had little or no effect on the British economy. As a matter of fact, what happened was, almost instantly, we increased our global trading with the Americas, both north and south, with China, with Japan, and at the same time, we were expanding our empire. It didn't take too long. As a matter of fact, it took less than 2 years before the European governments were angry enough to gain the incentive to ignore the ban. And Napoleon's European coalition began to collapse because they just could not miss out on having such a powerful and lucrative British trading partner. And ladies and gentlemen, history has the most amazing way of repeating itself. You know, what a remarkable little group of islands we are. Our Union flag is the most recognized symbol of statehood in the entire world. And you know, with all the doom and gloom recently, within the past 12 months, we've had much to celebrate. How proud we were as a nation as we celebrated the anniversary of Magna Carta, for example, written in 1215 by our baronial ancestors. A truly remarkable document, the very keystone to our liberty under the law. It was the very birth of our laws rising up from the people and not descending down from the masters who rule us. And if you look to the children of our empire, who have continued to celebrate our legacy of Parliament and the rule of law, there you will find stability, prosperity, democracy, and liberty. And also, how proud we were as a nation just a few months ago to celebrate the anniversary of Waterloo, 1815. Here was a classic example of neighbouring nations united as one against a forced unification of Europe. And similarly, we paid our respects with great pride to all of those who fought and fell as we celebrated the anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, 1945. Once again, nations united against those hands of tyranny who wanted to force the unification of Europe. But ladies and gentlemen, of all those souls before us, and all of those yet unborn, how proud will they be of us? What noble deeds will the written word of history say about us? And I'm reminded of that great American revolutionary, Dr. Joseph Warren, who he died at the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775, just 1 year before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And he said, "Will our fathers look from their celestial seats with smiling approbation upon their sons, who boldly stand forth in the cause of virtue? Are we, ladies and gentlemen, to be known for nothing more than being that generation who gratuitously surrendered the sovereignty of our country, who with frivolous disregard washed away the sacrifice of those who died to preserve our independence and the rights of our people to govern themselves? No. Ladies and gentlemen, we must not tarnish ourselves with that shame. As a young conservative in 1970, I believed then that we could have our cake and eat it, that we could still remain as the mother of our Commonwealth, with all its preference trade agreements, and still be part of a European economic community. How wrong I was. We were oblivious to the fact that Ted Heath was fully aware of the unpalatable truth. He sold us down the river, knowing that the ultimate aim of the European economic community was designed to undergo a metamorphosis into a single federal European state. In 1969, Ted Heath received a secret document known as the Werner Report. It was based on a 10-year plan for the future of Europe. And I shall read just one paragraph of it. The 10-year plan. The ultimate creation of a European federal state with single currency. All the basic instruments of national economic management, be they fiscal, monetary, incomes and regional policies, would ultimately be handed over to the central federal authority. That was the extent of Heath's betrayal. We've been fooled once. We must not be fooled a second time. And again, I'll quote the great Joseph Warren. Who among us would breed a serpent to destroy his children? It is an insult to democracy to refer to what we have now as the creation of a United States of Europe. For it is no such thing. It is far, far closer to a Soviet-style union thinly coated with an acceptable veneer of democracy. Each Prime Minister since Ted Heath has been aware and mainly compliant with that ultimate goal. Mrs. Thatcher being the exception. And our present Prime Minister has made it patently clear that he is no exception. And what a ghastly display of betrayal that we've all witnessed this week by the Tory grandees who were all for Britain's exit and have now mysteriously changed their minds. Who are these unctuous political creatures who are prepared to put up their own self-interests above the interests of this great country? You see, growing up in the 1950s, as I did, people in this country sailed through life, hardly noticing any intrusion into their lives by the state. The state's function was principally there to protect the realm and to help those who couldn't help themselves. But for the rest of us, it just left us alone to carry on with enjoying our life. We never dreamed that it could be any other way. Over the past 60 years, our country has changed from one of immense patriotic pride, self-belief, honour, integrity, respect, duty. Where's that all gone? composite of recent events shows that we are writing a recipe for civil disobedience and chaos, a dysfunctional society. We have to start by retaking control of our own nation's destiny, and to be able to remove the politicians who fail to put our wishes and our national interests first. Which brings me to a subject, the only subject in modern history that is preventing the British people from talking endlessly about the weather. Britain has always benefited from and enjoyed a slow, constant influx of ethnic diversity for the past 2,000 years, which over that time has evolved a common bond of history and shared values. But the results of uncontrolled migration is there for all the world to see. It simply equates to a divided and volatile society. And in this predatory world that we all live in, a country that is weak and in chaos is vulnerable to her enemies. And we now face those enemies from without and from within. Islam, for example, is not shy in telling us of its intentions. The Islamic leaders are being totally honest and truthful with us and upfront with us. Democracy is the train we ride to our ultimate goal. There is no such thing as moderate Islam. There is only Islam. They can't be more straightforward and honest than that. Islam is a political agenda. It has been since 633 AD, when Muhammad moved his following from Mecca to Medina, which is where he wrote the second part, which is the absolutely brutal part of the Quran. From then on, it took 26 years for Islam to butcher and plunder its way across North Africa and the Mediterranean, as far as Spain. By a program of piracy, it destroyed the Mediterranean trade routes in order to bring the Judeo-Christian economies to their knees. Osama bin Laden chose September the 11th very, very carefully indeed, because that was the date of the Battle of Vienna in 1683, which marked Islam's demise against Christian Europe and the beginning of Islam's political decline. By hitting the World Trade Center in New York, as opposed to hitting some military target, that was enormously symbolic, because it was to tell the world that this is marking the date of the rebirth of Islam rising up once more. Political agendas are always driven by the few and blindly followed by the many. And the opinions of the quiet majority is totally irrelevant. I was discussing this just recently with a member of Parliament from the Birmingham area. And she said that there were some Muslim people in her constituency who are absolutely appalled at the atrocities done in the name of Islam. And I said, well, I'm quite sure that's very true, madam. I'm positive of it. But they are not the ones driving the agenda. And at the end of the day, the sheep will always come to the calling of the shepherd. Because we must remember that we are actually a herding animal. And as such, we are susceptible to radicalization in some form or other, because of what is known in the Freudian world as group polarization. We in this room are stronger and more polarized in our views because we are with like-minded people. We, many of us, have chosen to be part of an identifiable intellectual tribe called UKIP. We sometimes telephone head office in order to seek instruction on party policy, and we then go out and dutifully comply with its directive. But the difference is that Islam believes that democracy's weakness is in its freedom to question. Islam's strength is in the word of the Imam, and his word is absolute. And if we continue to close our vigilant eye to the Trojan horse of Islamic moderation, then it will be at the peril of our children. It gives me no pleasure to stand here like Winston Churchill talking to Lord Halifax in the 1930s. But we need to address this issue now. We have to have the fearless conviction to throw away political correctness. The time has come for decent Muslim people to speak out loud and clear, whether they wish to live with us in a free, modern, progressive, interactive world, or they want to plunge us all back into the barbarism of a 7th century ideology. Because this is not going to go away. We do need Churchill, not Chamberlain, in our leadership at this time. There is little for me to say that hasn't already been said on the issue of immigration. But I will say this to those people who come here with good intentions. It is an honour and a privilege to live here, and your credibility, your contribution, your integration, and your loyalty has to be the price that you pay for sharing this green and pleasant land. This European Union is the new imperialism of the 21st century. We have to wake up and recognise it, where you subjugate countries, not with a bullet or a bomb, but by slow entrapment, cultural strangulation, and forced legislation, all aided so magnificently by the EU propaganda machine and the internet, of course. I'm sure that some of you may have seen those frightening propaganda comic books and games that the EU is now producing, aimed at indoctrinating our young children into becoming upstanding, flag-waving, anthem-singing Europeans first, and their British or French or Italian identity must become insignificant and second. They've not quite got to the goose-stepping bit yet, but that's undoubtedly on its way. That, ladies and gentlemen, has the familiar putrefying stench of Germany in 1922, when Hitler embarked upon his youth indoctrination program, which was initially aimed at 10-year-olds. And the list of the effrontery to everything that we hold dear goes on and on and on. But there is a glimmer of hope. People throughout the continent of Europe, in their millions, are finally awakening up to the fact that, like us, they have foolishly sold their birthrights, their national identities, their voluntary ability to contain their own borders and trade freely with whomsoever they wish. They have exchanged liberty and happiness for national obedience in the only continent on earth that is experiencing both an economic and an influential downward spiral.
Correct.
Our own homegrown political masters are trying to put this fear of lonely isolation into the minds of the British people. But it was our geographic isolation that saved us and the rest of Europe from Nazi Germany. It is our geographic isolation that has made us what we are. It is that very factor that helped to make us the greatest trading nation in the world. 40% of the entire world's trade came through the port of Liverpool, little more than 100 years ago. My grandparents were married then. It is people that trade, not governments. And trade between people has no bearing whatsoever on membership of this wretched union. When are these overgrown schoolboys going to learn that you can only negotiate anything in this life from a position of strength and never from a position of weakness? And when the 5th largest economy in the world pulls out and this federalisation plan for Europe begins to collapse, then and then only can Cameron properly renegotiate the terms of a successful relationship with our European neighbours. We in these islands must not waver in our resolve to reconnect with our great union of English-speaking democracies, for they are the true multi-race Hitler's kids, bonded by a common heritage. I'll finish right here. History, ladies and gentlemen, history will indeed treat us harshly if we do not remove ourselves from this doomed and devious empire-building enterprise before it completes that metamorphosis and it becomes the inescapable, all-controlling federal European Union of Socialist Republics. And finally, we must once again dare to stand alone, and let us cry out to all those souls before us and all those yet unborn that we of this generation did not fail them.